What would happen if an ordinary shepherd dared to challenge the most powerful king of Egypt? That question may sound like a paradox, something absurd and impossible. But it truly happened, not in a novel, not in some distant legend, but in a turbulent chapter of human history. On one side stood Pharaoh, the head of mighty Egypt, the man who commanded tens of thousands of soldiers, weapons, gold, worship, and even divine authority. On the other side was only Moses, once an exile, now left with nothing but a worn staff and an unshakable faith in an invisible God. The difference in power was so vast that no one would ever imagine a confrontation. Yet, from that very imbalance, one of the greatest stories in the Bible and in the history of the world began. Picture this. You are a common Egyptian living more than 3,000 years ago. Every day you see towering pyramids rising into the sky, armies marching beneath the blazing sun. And Pharaoh, the king believed to be the son of the God Ra, sitting on his throne, with no one daring to disobey. His power seemed absolute, immovable. But then, in the midst of all that glory, appeared a man with no army, no throne, only weary feet and a trembling voice. That man dared to say to Pharaoh, "Let my people go." At that very moment, a battle unlike any other began. It was not fought with swords or chariots, but between faith and power, between human weakness and the almighty strength of God. And it was this battle that gave rise to miracles. The world still remembers to this day the Nile turning into blood, darkness covering all of Egypt, and finally the sea splitting apart before the eyes of thousands. What makes this story extraordinary is not only the miracles themselves. It is the fact that an entire empire was defeated not by weapons, but by a faith that could not be shaken. Moses, a simple man, became the messenger of liberation. And Pharaoh, once seen as divine, was forced to bow before an invisible yet absolute power. Have you ever wondered why, after thousands of years, the story of Moses standing against Pharaoh still carries such weight? Why millions continue to retell it? Why countless others still debate it? And why generation after generation learns from it? Perhaps hidden within every detail lies a timeless lesson that there are forces unseen, yet powerful enough to change the course of human history. And that is the journey we are about to embark on. A journey to relive the most dramatic moments, from Moses leaving the desert to face Pharaoh, to the sea itself parting and opening the way for millions to escape slavery. This is not just an ancient tale. It is living proof that when humanity dares to believe, miracles can become reality. So, let us turn back the clock. Stand before Pharaoh's throne. Hear the cries of the enslaved Israelites. Watch as Moses raises his staff before the people. And then ask yourself, can a miracle rewrite history? And why does this story still make the entire world tremble after thousands of years? An unexpected beginning. If you have ever heard of Moses as a great leader, a fearless prophet, then set that image aside for a moment. Because to truly understand the power of this story, we must begin from an unexpected starting point. Moses was not born into glory, nor was he from the beginning a man of unwavering strength. On the contrary, his life began with the fragility of a child who almost did not survive. Let us go back to Egypt when the Hebrews, the Israelites, were enslaved. They were forced to labor under the burning sun, making bricks, building cities, and enduring cruel lashes from their masters. As the population of Israel grew, Pharaoh feared they might rise up in rebellion. So he issued a terrifying decree. Every newborn Hebrew boy must be thrown into the Nile River. It was a death sentence for an entire generation. In the midst of that bloody backdrop, Moses was born. His mother, an unknown Hebrew woman, could not bear to see her child killed. She took a bold step. She placed Moses in a basket sealed with tar and set him adrift on the Nile River, entrusting his fate to the protection of God. Ironically, that child was lifted out of the water by none other than Pharaoh's daughter. She was moved with compassion and raised him as her own son. From then on, Moses grew up in the palace, becoming a prince. He learned writing, mathematics, the art of war, and the secrets of Egyptian governance. Everything seemed set for him. Moses would one day hold power and glory, a part of the mightiest empire of that time, even in the palace, surrounded by luxury. Moses carried within him an undeniable root. He was a Hebrew, a child of an oppressed people. Then the day of destiny came. As an adult, Moses saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave. Rage flared within him, and he struck down the oppressor. It was an act born from anger and justice, but it also made him a fugitive. Pharaoh immediately sought to kill him. And so, from a prince clothed in silk, he became a hunted man fleeing into the desert. In the desert, Moses' life took a different path. He came to the land of Midian, married the daughter of a priest, and lived as an unknown shepherd. The image of the former prince was now only a memory. Instead, Moses spent his days leading flocks across barren hills, living quietly, far from conflict. Perhaps to him, ambitions, dreams of justice, or the rescue of his people had long faded into oblivion. He became an ordinary man, as if his story had ended. But it was at that very moment that the extraordinary happened. One day, while guiding his flock near Mount Horeb, Moses saw a strange sight: a bush engulfed in flames, burning fiercely, yet not consumed. As he approached, a voice called out from within the fire, "Moses, Moses." Imagine what he must have felt. Before his eyes was something that defied the laws of nature, fire blazing. Yet the bush remained intact. In his ears was a voice calling his very name, echoing through the wilderness. Moses trembled and even turned his face away in fear. But the voice spoke again, full of authority. "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground." God revealed himself to Moses in that burning bush, and he gave him an unthinkable mission. Return to Egypt, stand before Pharaoh, and set the Israelites free from slavery. You might think Moses would eagerly accept, like a hero ready to step into history. But no, his reaction was fear, hesitation, even refusal. He said, "Who am I to go to Pharaoh? Who am I to lead the Israelites?" He piled up excuses. "I am clumsy with words. I have no strength. I am unworthy." And this is what makes the story even more remarkable. The great leader of the Bible did not begin with confidence, but with weakness. Moses was not a superhuman. He was simply an ordinary man, full of fear and doubt. But God answered, "I will be with you." God did not choose Moses because he was strong. He chose him precisely because of his weakness, so that through him, God's power would be made complete. That moment of the burning bush that was never consumed was the first push in the journey. It shook Moses from his quiet life, drove him out of his comfort zone, and placed him in front of a mission no one could have imagined, to challenge Pharaoh. And from here, Moses' life entered a new chapter. From an unknown shepherd, he would stand before the throne of the most powerful ruler of that time. But what surprises us is not only the outcome, but the weak beginning itself. It reminds us that sometimes the most ordinary people, even those with the most broken pasts, are the ones chosen to write the greatest pages of history. The first confrontation after 40 years of quiet life in the desert, Moses left his flock behind and returned to Egypt. The land where he had once grown up as a prince now loomed before him as a dreadful challenge. The day he set foot on that soil again, old memories flooded back. The grand palaces, the towering statues of gods, the mighty armies, all reminders of Pharaoh's unmatched power. But this time, he did not return as a fugitive. He returned with a mission. At his side was Aaron, his older brother, ready to share the heavy burden. Together, they went straight into the palace, the very center of Egypt's supreme power. Inside were towering stone pillars, carvings etched with tales of conquest, and a golden throne that gleamed where Pharaoh sat, surrounded by courtiers and Egyptian magicians. Under the stern gaze of the royal court, Moses and Aaron stepped forward. Their declaration rang out, bold and unwavering. "The Lord, the God of Israel, says, 'Let my people go, so that they may worship him in the wilderness. The air in the chamber instantly tightened. Pharaoh stared down at the two men before him, the corner of his mouth curling into a scornful smile. He leaned back on his throne as if watching a ridiculous play. Then his deep, commanding voice thundered, "Who is this Lord that I should obey him? Why should I let Israel go?" His words cut like a cold blade. To Pharaoh, such a declaration was nothing more than the arrogance of slaves daring to defy an empire. In his eyes, Egypt was the center of the world, while the God of Israel was just an unfamiliar name without weight. But to show that this message was no empty claim, Moses threw his staff to the ground. Before the entire court, the staff transformed into a living serpent, slithering across the cool stone floor. Its hiss echoed through the hall. Eyes widened in shock. Some stepped back in fear. This was beyond anything they had witnessed in their rituals to the gods. Pharaoh frowned, but did not yield. He ordered the Egyptian magicians to step forward. They also threw down their staffs, and through their tricks and sorcery, they too became serpents. The crowd sighed in relief. Pharaoh smirked, as if to prove that Egypt's power was no less. Yet before the whole assembly, the serpent from Moses' staff lunged forward and swallowed their serpent's whole. The entire hall fell silent. The magicians faltered, unable to explain. What power could cause such a thing? All were witnesses, yet no one could stop it. Still, Pharaoh's heart did not soften. He refused to yield. Instead, he made the labor of the Israelites even harsher. Then freeing them, Pharaoh added heavier chains. The Hebrews were forced not only to continue making bricks, but also to gather their own straw, while their production quotas remained unchanged. Cries of anguish rose from every corner. Their suffering doubled, and injustice pressed heavier upon them. For Moses, this was an excruciating moment. He had obeyed the command. He had dared to stand before the throne and perform a sign. Yet the result was more hardship for his people. The Israelites turned against him. "You have made us a stench in Pharaoh's sight. You have only made our burden heavier." Their reproach pierced his heart like a blade. But the story did not end there. The sign in the palace was only the beginning. Pharaoh had seen it, the court had seen it, and all Egypt had been warned that a confrontation beyond the ordinary was unfolding. Pharaoh's refusal did not stop. The planet only set the stage for what was to come, fiercer and more devastating. The throne of Egypt had seemed invincible, but now a crack had appeared. The serpent that swallowed the others in the palace was not just a startling sign. It was a prophecy. The power of an empire would soon be challenged, not by a mighty army, but by the hand of the God they had scorned. And from that moment on, Egypt unknowingly stepped into a chain of events that would change history forever. The 9 plagues. Even after witnessing the staff turn into a serpent right in the palace, Pharaoh remained unyielding. From that moment, a chain of terrifying events began. They were not random, natural disasters. They were 10 plagues unleashed, each one striking down the pride of Egypt and exposing Pharaoh's helplessness before the power of the Lord. 1. Water turned to blood. Moses and Aaron went to the Nile River, the source of life and the most sacred deity of Egypt. Before the people, Aaron raised his staff and struck the water. Immediately, the river turned into blood. Fish floated dead, the stench filled the air, and the nation was shaken. Egyptians dug wells along the banks for drinking water, for everywhere else there was blood. The magicians of Egypt tried their skills, and by their enchantments they also turned water into blood. Pharaoh's heart grew harder. To him, this was just another trick, not worthy of surrender. 2. The plague of frogs. Soon after, frogs swarmed everywhere. From the Nile, they invaded houses, bedrooms, ovens, and even cooking pots. Egypt had once regarded frogs as a symbol of fertility, but now they became a nightmare. The croaking echoed day and night, and no one could rest. Once again, the magicians imitated the plague, bringing forth even more frogs. Instead of helping, they only made things worse. Pharaoh pleaded with Moses to ask the Lord to take them away. When the frogs died, they were piled into massive heaps, and the land reeked with stench. But once the plague ended, Pharaoh hardened his heart again. 3. Dust turned to gnats. At Moses' command, Aaron struck the dust of the earth with his staff. Instantly, countless specks of dust became gnats, covering people and animals. Chaos erupted across Egypt. This time, the magicians tried to copy the miracle, but failed. They admitted to Pharaoh, "This is the finger of God." That confession was pivotal. Those who were once the masters of magic, pillars of Egypt's religion, now openly admitted defeat. Yet Pharaoh remained stubborn. 4. Swarms of flies. One day, the sky darkened with swarms of flies. They filled houses, contaminated food, and invaded every corner. Nothing was clean, no place was safe. Yet there was one clear distinction. In the land of Goshen, where the Israelites lived, there were no flies. This was undeniable proof that the plague came from the hand of God, who separated his people from others. Pharaoh began to waver, promising to let Israel go. But when the flies disappeared, he broke his word and hardened his heart again. 5. The death of livestock. The livestock of Egypt cattle. Horses, camels, sheep, and goats suddenly fell to a deadly disease and died in droves. The cries of animals echoed across the fields. Egypt, wealthy through her herds, lost a vital resource. Yet not a single animal belonging to the Israelites died. The distinction grew clearer. Still, Pharaoh did not yield. 6. Boils on people and animals. Moses and Aaron took soot from a furnace and scattered it into the air. Painful boils broke out on people and animals alike. Egypt cried out in agony. Even the magicians, once confident in Pharaoh's court, were now covered in sores, unable to stand before Moses. But Pharaoh's pride remained. His heart was shut tight. 7. Hail and fire. In Egypt's hot, dry land, a storm unlike any other struck. Thunder roared, and hail rained down, mingled with fire. Trees splintered, crops were destroyed, and livestock in the open were killed. Egypt had never seen such a disaster. Yet, once again, the land of Goshen was untouched. Terrified, Pharaoh promised to let the Israelites go. But when the storm ended, he went back on his word. His stubbornness surpassed reason, becoming arrogance against God himself. 8. Locusts devour the land. When the east wind blew, swarms of locusts descended upon Egypt. They devoured everything wheat, barley, fruit, whatever had survived the hail. The once fertile land was stripped bare. Pharaoh's officials pleaded with him, "How long will you let this ruin fall on us? Let them go." But Pharaoh resisted, allowing only the men to leave while insisting women and children remain. Moses refused. The locusts continued until Moses prayed, and a west wind carried them away. Yet Pharaoh hardened his heart once more. 9. Darkness over the land. For 3 days, darkness covered Egypt. It was no ordinary night, but a darkness so thick that people could not see one another or move from their places. Terror filled the land. Yet in Goshen, the Israelites had light. Again, Pharaoh promised to let them go, but demanded to keep their livestock. Moses refused, explaining that the animals were needed for offerings to the Lord. Enraged, Pharaoh shouted, "Leave my presence. If you appear before me again, you will die." The unyielding heart. The 9 plagues were not merely punishments. They were a direct confrontation between the power of God and the arrogance of Pharaoh. Though he saw, though he suffered, though the land was destroyed, Pharaoh again and again refused. His stubbornness went beyond ordinary defiance. It was arrogance against the divine, contempt for undeniable truth. One by one, the gods of Egypt were humiliated. The Nile, the frogs, the insects, the livestock, the sky, the crops, even light itself defeated. Pharaoh's authority, which seemed invincible, crumbled before the hand of the Creator, and in his arrogance he led his nation into disaster. The climax, the final plague, 9 plagues, had struck, leaving Egypt in ruins, its gods humiliated one by one. Yet Pharaoh still refused to yield. His heart was hardened, his pride unbroken. Though he had seen disasters, ruined harvests, and darkness covering his land, he mocked and still refused to free the Israelites. But then came the most dreadful night in Egypt's history, a night no one would ever forget. Beforehand, Moses had stood before Pharaoh with a solemn warning at midnight. The Lord would pass through Egypt, and every firstborn would die. From the crown prince sitting on the throne to the child of a prisoner in the dungeon, from the wealthiest household to the poorest, not a single home would be spared. Only the Israelites who obeyed God's command to slaughter a lamb and put its blood on their doorframes would be saved from the plague. That night became the first Passover, a moment that would be remembered forever. Each Israelite family prepared a special meal, eating roasted lamb with unleavened bread, with belts fastened, staffs in hand, ready to leave at any moment. They waited in tense silence, in an atmosphere heavy with the unknown. And, at midnight, the horror unfolded. Death swept through Egypt, and in every household the firstborn perished. The royal palace resounded with cries as the crown prince breathed his last. Farmers' homes, fishing villages, even prison cells shared the same tragedy. Even the firstborn of animals died. Across Egypt, cries of grief rose like never before. Not a single home escaped mourning. From the palace to the narrowest alleys, the wailing merged into one sorrowful chorus of an entire nation. The desert night's silence was shattered by anguish. No more pride, no more mocking laughter, no more display of power, only grief echoing through the land. Pharaoh, who had once called himself divine, could not escape. His firstborn son, the heir to the throne, died that very night. The proudest heart in Egypt was torn apart. In his grief, Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron in the dark. Gone were his challenges. Gone was his scorn. He could only cry out, "Take your people, your flocks, your herds, everything, and leave my country. And pray for me also." The man who had once forced an entire nation to bow, now bowed beneath the weight of his own loss. The empire that seemed unshakable trembled at its core. The Israelites, enslaved for hundreds of years, were now commanded to leave that very night. There was no delay. They gathered provisions, bread so hastily prepared it had no time to rise, tied up their belongings, took their children and their livestock, and together they departed Egypt. A vast multitude, hundreds of thousands of men, not counting women and children, moved out into the night. The Egyptians, after the devastating tragedy, did not stop them. Instead, they urged them to leave quickly, fearing that if they remained, the nation would be utterly destroyed. Many Egyptian families even gave the Israelites silver, gold, and treasures, eager to see them depart. The scene was both chaotic and solemn, a nation stepping out of the darkness of slavery onto the path of freedom. They left behind the land that had held them captive for generations, carrying with them the hope of a promised land. That night was not merely the beginning of the Exodus. It became a sacred milestone. Each year, the Israelites would commemorate it in the Passover. They remembered that it was the blood of the Lamb on the doorframe that saved them, and it was the hand of the Lord that led them out of Egypt. For centuries, Passover would remind them that freedom does not come from human strength, but from the deliverance of the Almighty. That night carved a truth into history. No throne, no power can stand when God acts. If the earlier plagues were filled with chaotic sounds, the croaking of frogs, the swarm of locusts, the cries in the darkness, the final plague left behind a different sound, the silence of death. The bustling noise of prosperous Egypt was gone. Only the wailing of grief spread from house to house, painting a portrait of mourning across the land. Go. That silence was the ultimate proof that Pharaoh had been defeated. The mighty empire of Egypt was not brought down by swords or war, but by the unseen hand of God. And that silence marked the beginning of a new sound, the footsteps of a people marching forward, stepping into freedom. From that night, the story turned to a new chapter. The Israelites were no longer bowed slaves, but a vast caravan moving toward the future. Behind them lay a broken, grieving Egypt. Before them stretched a path filled with uncertainty, yet shining with hope. The Exodus was not just the relocation of a people. It was the downfall of an empire and the birth of a free nation. The Passover night, marked with lamb's blood on the doors, and cries of sorrow across the land, was the threshold to the longest and greatest journey in Israel's history. The final plague was not only the climax of 10 judgments. It was the moment that pierced the human heart when a mighty king lost his son, when an entire nation wept, and when an oppressed people began to walk free. In the midst of grief and silence, another sound arose, the call of freedom. And from that moment, the great Exodus truly began. The greatest miracle, the parting of the Red Sea. The night of mourning had brought Pharaoh to his knees, but the pride in his heart had not truly died. As the cries of grief faded, he realized that the Israelites, the vast labor force of Egypt, were leaving with their livestock, their wealth, and no sign of return. From the ashes of sorrow, his heart blazed again with hatred. Pharaoh immediately changed his mind. He summoned the mightiest army of Egypt, gleaming chariots, fierce war horses, and elite soldiers. The grinding wheels and pounding hooves thundered across the land. Egypt would not allow a band of slaves to walk away so easily. Meanwhile, the Israelites were on their journey out of Egypt. They carried their families, children, possessions, and flocks. The joy of freedom had just begun to blossom, when suddenly a rumble shook the ground. Pharaoh's army was approaching. Fear spread throughout the camp. Ahead of them lay the vast Red Sea, waves crashing endlessly, with no way across. Behind them thundered the chariots of Pharaoh, closing in at terrifying speed. The Israelites cried out in despair, "Why did you bring us out of Egypt to die in this desert? It would have been better to remain slaves than to perish here." Their words pierced Moses' heart. Around him was the sea on one side, the sword on the other. Every path seemed closed. In that chaos, Moses lifted his voice. "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord brings today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." His declaration rang out like a spark in the darkness. Moses had no weapon, no military strategy, but he had faith. As the Egyptian army drew near, a miracle occurred. The pillar of cloud that had been leading the Israelites moved behind them, standing between them and the army. All night long, the cloud was darkness to Egypt, but light to Israel. Two worlds stood apart, one cloaked in shadow, the other bathed in hope. At dawn, God commanded Moses. He raised his staff and stretched out his hand over the sea. Instantly, a mighty east wind blew all night, pushing the waters aside. The raging sea split into two towering walls, leaving a dry path right through the middle. The Israelites were stunned. Before their eyes, the sea, once their final barrier, became a road. They could hardly believe it. The water stood like massive walls, motionless while they walked on dry ground. The howling wind, the crashing waves, and the light of dawn created a scene unlike anything in history. Thousands upon thousands walked through. Mothers leading children, fathers carrying bundles, the elderly leaning on staffs, herds bleeding, all crossing together. On their faces was fear mingled with wonder and hope overflowing. As they crossed, Pharaoh's army charged into the sea. Wheels clattered on the dry ground, horses neighed, and soldiers shouted. Egypt's finest believed they could still overtake the fleeing slaves. But in the midst of the sea, their wheels sank, splintered, and jammed. Horses reared in panic. Soldiers faltered, as if an unseen hand was fighting against them. Terror seized them, and they cried out, "Let us flee. The Lord is fighting for Israel against us." When the Israelites had all crossed safely, God commanded Moses once more. He stretched out his hand, and the waters crashed back down. Towering waves collapsed, burying the Egyptian army. The cries of soldiers vanished beneath the roar of the sea. Chariots and warriors, once symbols of pride, disappeared into the depths. Pharaoh and the mightiest army of that age were destroyed. Not a single soldier survived. When the sea calmed, the Red Sea returned to its place, leaving only debris and bodies washing ashore. On the far side, the Israelites stood and looked back. They had walked through the sea, and now they saw their enemies swallowed by it. Fear gave way to uncontainable joy. Moses and the people lifted their voices in song. The Lord is my strength and my song. He has become my salvation. He has hurled horse and rider into the sea. Their song echoed through the wilderness, the first anthem of a people freed from slavery. Women took tambourines, dancing and singing. Sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. The horse and its rider he has hurled into the sea. The miracle of the Red Sea was not just a historical event. It became an eternal symbol. The sea, seemingly unstoppable, opened a way when faith was placed in God. The empire of Egypt, seemingly eternal, collapsed in a single night. True strength does not lie in swords or armies, but in the hand of the Creator. And this miracle carved into history a message. When humanity believes there is no way forward, God can open a path right through the sea. Pharaoh began this confrontation with mocking words. Who is the Lord that I should obey him? But he ended in utter defeat, his entire army buried beneath the waters. The mighty empire, its pyramids, its gods all powerless before the Lord. The parting of the Red Sea became one of the greatest miracles ever recorded. It was the climax of deliverance, the end of Pharaoh's pride, and the beginning of a free nation stepping into a new destiny. From the night of mourning in Egypt to the radiant dawn on the shore of the Red Sea, the world witnessed an undeniable truth. The strongest empire can fall, but faith in the Lord can open a way through the deepest waters. A message beyond time. The Red Sea had closed behind the Israelites, burying the Egyptian army beneath roaring waves. The miracle was complete, and a nation of slaves had become a nation of the free. But the story did not end there. It was not only an event of the past, not just a chapter of one people's history, but a message that reaches beyond time, a torch that lights the way for every generation, in every circumstance. Throughout the story, the contrast is clear. On one side, Pharaoh, representing power, weapons, armies, and a throne. On the other side, Moses, holding nothing but a staff and faith. Humanly speaking, that confrontation was impossible. No one believed that a shepherd could defeat the greatest king of his age, but the outcome proved the opposite. That message still holds true. Real strength is not found in numbers or in power, but in faith placed in the one who is greater than all. When human authority appears undefeatable, a steadfast faith can still overturn everything. Moses was not born a hero. He trembled. He refused. He claimed he was clumsy in speech. He did not want to stand before Pharaoh, nor to carry such a heavy responsibility. Yet in that weakness, the strength of God was revealed. Pharaoh, on the other hand, had everything: armies, authority, worshippers. But arrogance blinded him. He mocked the warnings, dismissed the miracles, refused even when his land was devastated. In the end, that arrogance led him and his empire to ruin. The story reminds us, weakness placed in the hands of God becomes strength, but arrogance, no matter how great, will be torn down. If Moses was just an ordinary man, a man who had failed, who had fled, who had lived in obscurity, then what enabled him to do extraordinary things? The answer was not in Moses himself, but in the one who stood behind him. Faith turned a simple staff into the instrument of miracles. Closeness to God turned a weak man into an immortal symbol. That same question is asked of every generation. What enables us, ordinary people, to change our circumstances? Perhaps, like Moses, it is when we place our trust in a power greater than ourselves. The story of Moses and Pharaoh is not only about religion, it is also the picture of human life through every age. The Red Sea may represent any barrier we face: fear, failure, despair, or challenges that seem impossible. Pharaoh may represent oppressive forces, social pressures, or the shadows within ourselves, our pride, our despair, or the burdens we cannot release. Moses represents us ordinary people, yet called to stand before something greater than ourselves. And God is the one who can open a way where there seems to be no way. That message is for today. When you feel cornered, when you believe there is no escape, remember that there is still a power that can part the sea. The story did not only save one nation, it changed the course of human history. From the Red Sea, Israel became a free people, stepping into a new journey, and in time shaping the civilization, culture, and faith of billions for thousands of years. Without the Exodus, there would be no free Israel. Without Moses standing up, there would be no parted sea. And without faith, history might have gone another way. This shows us one person with unwavering faith can change the flow of history. Faith cannot be separated from courage. Moses was afraid, yet he stepped forward. He faltered, yet he raised his staff. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to move forward even while afraid. And when courage is joined with faith, the impossible becomes possible. The sea parts, a mighty army is defeated, and a powerless nation is set free. Looking back at the whole story, one red thread runs through it. Faith, courage, and God's guidance can change history. That is not just a lesson for the past, but for today. When we face the pharaohs of our lives, when the Red Seas block our path, we must remember Moses. He was not a flawless hero, but he became one because he placed his trust in God and dared to step forward. The story of Moses is not only about an ancient miracle. It reminds us that in human weakness, there is still a greater strength of strength that can open a way, change destiny, and rewrite history. From the beginning, as a prince of Egypt, to the day he fled into the desert as a forgotten wanderer, the life of Moses seemed destined to fade into obscurity. But from the burning bush, a voice called out and changed everything. Moses, the man who once trembled and refused, became the one who dared to stand before the mightiest throne, carrying the command of the Lord, "Let my people go." Pharaoh, with the arrogance of an empire, stubbornly resisted. He dismissed the warnings, mocked the miracles, and led his entire nation into disaster. Every sky, every field, every river bore witness to an undeniable truth. Human power has limits, but God's power does not. The climax came on the night of mourning, when every firstborn of Egypt fell from the palace throne to the prison cell. At last, Pharaoh relented and let the Israelites go. Yet his pride still smoldered. That journey ended with an image carved forever into history. The Israelites walking on dry ground between walls of water, while the greatest army of its time was swallowed by the sea. A complete reversal, a living truth. True strength is not found in weapons or thrones, but in faith placed in the Lord. The story of Moses is not only history, it is a mirror for life today. The Red Sea may be the challenges we face: failure, crisis, fear. Pharaoh may be the pressures that weigh us down: power, injustice, or even the shadows within ourselves. And Moses may be the reflection of each of us: ordinary, weak, yet called to step into something extraordinary. Miracles are not only what happened in the past, they remain reminders that faith can open a way where there is no way. When you feel cornered, remember, there is still one who can part the sea. The story of Moses, Pharaoh, and the Red Sea is not just meant to be retold, but to move us, to encourage us, and to transform us. It shows us that faith, courage, and God's guidance can change history, and that truth is not only for the past, it is for today. If you believe this story still carries power for the world today, subscribe, and share this video. And do not miss the next episode in the series, Mysteries of the Bible, where we will explore even more astonishing stories. Let the story of Moses be more than an old page in a book. Let it become a living source of inspiration in your life. Because, just as in the past, miracles can still happen when we place our trust in the one who is beyond every limit.